I'd like to welcome everybody. It's great to see the names that we have here this morning calling in from all over the Lake Huron Basin and indeed some areas outside of that. When we take a look at some of the names that we know and recognize, we acknowledge that we have folks from various levels of government calling in, a bunch of folks from not-for-profit, the not-for-profit and charitable worlds, conservation authorities, as well as just general members of the public. And indeed, that's our goal with this community action initiative for Lake Huron and the Georgian Bay watershed. It is really about networking each other with on issues of interest to learn from each other and share with each other about this. And as we get started, I just want to take a moment to acknowledge that we are indeed on. We're speaking from territory of the Anishinaabe people in this area, and specifically we have two treaties that we're responsible to and for, which is the Robinson-Huron Treaty of 1850 and the Williams Treaty of 1920. Minadogami, the name within the Georgian Bay Biosphere, means spirit of the water, and it's one name that we've learned for the Georgian Bay waters. And being the day after the National Indigenous Day, we acknowledge and recognize that there is active work that we need to do. The General Territory is home to and cared for by the Anishinaabe peoples, the Mohawk, and its ancestral territory for the Huron-Wendat. We also know and acknowledge that Métis and the Inuit are also resident in this territory. As residents of the Lake Huron Basin and the Great Lakes, we're part of Turtle Island. We understand that there is much work to be done to honor good relationships with the first and enduring peoples of Turtle Island. Georgian Bay Biosphere, as the UNESCO designated entity, acknowledges the rights of Indigenous people in this territory, and we work toward respectful and reciprocal relationships as allies in this territory to implement the TRC and UNDRIP, the United Nations Declaration of Rights of Indigenous Peoples. Chi-miigwech to everybody for taking the time to understand the territory that you are in and acknowledging that actively through your work and on a daily basis. So welcome again to the mini summit. The Lake Huron Georgian Bay Community Action Framework has been coming together since 2005, really to network, share experiences, learn from each other, find ways to support each other's actions and care of the lands and waters in this area. Today's gathering, it builds on many past events. Last fall, we held a two-day virtual summit where participants had the opportunity to complete a short post-summit survey. And in that survey, we learned we asked what topics would be of interest for future structured discussions. And this topic of community engagement came out on top. There's lots of angles that we could take on this topic. We've chosen four and hope that others will bring their experiences forward in our follow-up breakout rooms after the presentations. We're going to do our best to create the environment that we've all been missing, that face-to-face opportunities to chat. We're going to do that digitally through those breakout rooms, but also taking questions and engaging in conversation as we can after the presentations. As noted already, we'll be recording today's session and uploading it to the initiative's website. And a link to that video will be circulated to attendees after the presentation. So presenters, you can choose to turn your cameras off during the presentations, or you can have your video up and running. And Katrina, I'm just going to confirm that Kyla is ready to go.
Yes, so I will stop sharing my screen and Kyla can start sharing hers.
Awesome.
You got for that, Greg and Katrina.
Is it working all right, Kyla, for sharing?
Yes.
Okay, so I'm just going to introduce you, Kyla. So Ani Joshkawabinokwe, or Kyla Judge, has been part of the Biosphere staff team since 2018. She's the Indigenous Youth Coordinator, managing staff for the Georgian Bay Anishinaabe Youth Organization, which works out of the Georgian Bay Biosphere office. Kyla is an Anishinaabe Kwe of the Martin clan from Shawniga First Nation. And as the Indigenous Youth Coordinator, Kyla leads the planning and delivery of some really amazing youth programming and land-based education opportunities in this territory and region, including the recently completed Wigwas Jimon, or birch bark canoe, named Ishkinagig. Kyla, we're really, really pleased to have you here today. Chimigwich for taking the time to be with us and share some of your teachings and learnings and understandings. Thank you.
Miigwech. Yeah, so just a quick little introduction. Ani Bojo, Meno Gijep, and Josh Kwabano Koi Indigenous cause, Nima Kyla and Do, Jaganashi knows when, Wabshishi and Dodam, and Shawanaga and Donjaba, Anishinaabe Kwe and Dow. So my Anishinaabe name is Jaushkawabanoque, which loosely translates to Blue Dawn. My English name is Kyla. I am from the Martin clan, and I am also from Shawanaga First Nation. I identify as a Anishinaabe Kwe, an Ojibwe woman, and yeah, so I am here to talk a little bit about youth engagement. I'm very excited about this. When I was invited to present and share a little bit of my knowledge and my experience on youth engagement, I just wanted to jam pack in so much, but don't want to overwhelm everybody. But yes, so my role is very unique. So I work with the Georgian Bay Anishinaabe Youth and the Georgian Bay Biosphere as the Indigenous Youth Coordinator. So a little bit about G-Bay, that's where my focus is going to be with regards to youth engagement, but specifically my sort of sphere and area of expertise is Indigenous youth engagement. So a little bit of background info on the Georgian Bay Anishinaabe Youth is that G-Bay, that's the short form acronym that we use, was created in 2018. G-Bay is an Indigenous youth-led grassroots initiative. We really focus on mentorship through capacity building. And with that, our work as G-Bay wouldn't be able to exist in the way that it does without the support of the Georgian Bay Biosphere. And our relationship is very unique. Often the best way to describe how our relationship works is that we're like a department of the Biosphere, or if you're more familiar with the terms, at an arm's length of the Biosphere. That's kind of how we operate. And we work with Indigenous youth ages 13 to 29. But of course, we are very flexible with that. I'm very well aware of funding responsibilities, but also the relevance and importance of supporting Indigenous people collectively. And we primarily focus on working with youth in the Eastern Georgian Bay region. So we look to support youth from primarily from Moose Deer Point First Nation in the south, all the way up to Henby Inlet First Nation in the north. But of course, those are just some of the I guess different areas that we work with in the region. And the focus of our group is to create safe spaces for Indigenous youth to build strong community and cultural connections. So there's a lot of work that we do, and we cover a lot of very interesting and unique things. So just to give you a bit of an idea of how we operate, because like I had said, our relationship with the Biosphere, the Georgian Bay Biosphere, is very unique. I put together this circle, and putting together this little diagram reminded me of some training we did and how the outer layers of the circle sort of protect and support the inner layers. And so we look at the outer layer being staff and board, that's also including myself. And then we look at the inner circle, the second layer is our community partners. The work we do for and with the Georgian Bay Anishinaabe Youth is very heavily intertwined with community work. And networking is quite fundamental to the way that we operate. And then if we go into the third layer of the circle is the Georgian Bay Anishinaabe Youth Advisory. And so this advisory is where the Indigenous youth-led part comes in, and that we have a team of 8 Indigenous youth that guide and shape our programming. And then the very inner circle at the bottom is our program participants. And so this is the way that we sort of approach engagement in a very, I'm gonna say like communal and holistic framework, in that understanding that each layer impacts each other, but we're all very much connected. So to give you a little bit more information on some of the programming that we've done, because when talking about land-based learning and Anishinaabe Godzilin, there's a lot that is encompassed in that. And for us, our experience with Anishinaabe is very unique and specific to our group, but also understanding that Anishinaabe is land-based learning, and that is very specific to the territory that we are practicing land-based learning within. So about our advisory circle, like I had mentioned, we have 8 Indigenous youth that guide and shape our programming and the work that we do. And so with that in mind, that's where we really focus in on mentorship and capacity building. It's like very different. So from my role as staff for the project, it means that I'm doing my absolute best to ensure that the knowledge that I have about project management, working in the nonprofit sector, and working with communities is something that I really try to share as much as possible with the advisory circle. And so that's providing them with the opportunity to get their foot in the door and to understand how our work is relevant within our communities. But also it's very helpful for those young people to understand that this mentorship opportunity and capacity building opportunities that we have are employable workforce skills. So with that in mind, some of the other really fun, the flip side, the fun side of the capacity building and mentorship is that we'll often ask the young people, the youth that we work with, like what they want to do. And so very like tangible, like certificates for kayaking or canoeing, first aid, wilderness first aid, and so looking at ways that we can really grow and support the tangible and intangible capacity building pieces of working in the nonprofit sector, but also to support leadership skills and knowledge. And then, like I had mentioned as well, partnerships are very foundational to the work that we do. Our partners that we work with in the communities are just amazing. They are so wonderful. They're so kind and so generous with us because as a team of young Indigenous people leading a group such as GBay, there's a lot that we are learning on the fly. And with respect to the work that is that already exists in our communities, the First Nations themselves, or within the community organizations we work with, there's a lot of kindness that we are offered, a lot of time, which is very much appreciated. And then going into some of the Anishinaabe in the land-based learning is that, as Greg had mentioned, we built a Wigwash Jumon, a birch bark canoe in 2019. And so since building her in 2019, a lot of our programming sort of, I'm gonna say like focus, like pivots sort of around the tangible and intangible skills and knowledge that we learn throughout the canoe build, which is where, you know, the canoe certifications come into play. And so then looking at some of the other ways that we've approached engagement this year is shifting towards online virtual programs, while very mindful of systemic barriers and that internet accessibility is not an option for a lot of people, myself included. So as the program coordinator, there's a lot of work that we do internally in discussing and how to address and ensure that the people that we want to work with feel supported. And so often that means we're, instead of having you know, long online meetings on Zoom, it means that perhaps we send a few emails instead, or that we create short videos on the activity at hand. So the pictures on the side just kind of share some of the highlights of our programming over the last few years. So some of the questions that I had been asked about youth engagement are like, what are the measures of success? And so for our group, as I had mentioned, our group is very unique. As an Indigenous youth-led grassroots initiative, there are very unique sort of indicators of what successful engagement looks like. And so breaking it down into four, I guess, pillars is participation. So for our group, because we were only established in 2018, we do have 8 core members. And so those advisory members, they are long-term. They've been part of the creation of GBay since the very beginning. And so to see that, that alone, to have 8 young people dedicated to GBay for almost 3 years is quite the success in itself. But alongside with that too, looking at some of the other numbers that are very important and necessary for some of our funding, that we've been able to support just over 200 youth in 2020 to 2021 alone. So thinking about how this last year has been basically online. That's a lot to take in, and I'm very grateful for all of the time that the young people have spent with me. And then going on into some of the other parts of successful engagement is ensuring that we are putting out accurate representation in the media about the work that we're doing. So for our young people, it means that despite being in a pandemic, the only pictures that we have of our team are of 4 of us. And so for the rest of our team, we have to be able to ensure that we are continuing that sense of community, that sense of belonging. And so having accurate and relevant social media output is very much necessary, not only for our current long-term participants, but also to ensure that we are accurately representing the diverse communities of young people that we work with. And like I had mentioned as well, partnerships. So our partners that we work with are community partners. They're not solely focused on Indigenous youth programming themselves. We work with various partners such as lands departments in various First Nations. We work with provincial parks. We work with various different program areas within the Biosphere itself. So that's important to understand, because with respect to Anishinaabe and the direction that young people are giving on sort of program areas, it's very important to listen to the direction that they are offering. More often than not, it is very difficult for young people to voice their concern or their opinion, but also as staff of the program, such as myself, it's imperative that I listen, but I also act on the direction that they're providing. And so that goes into decision making. So with respect to those 8 core group members, the 8 advisory members that we have, it is very, I can't stress it enough how important it is to ensure that the young people that we work with, so GBA, that the young people feel and understand and know that they have decision-making, I don't want to say power, but that's essentially what we're getting at, is that the direction that they give us, the feedback that they give us is taken into consideration, but also explicitly identified within program development. It's very important because with working with Indigenous youth, we are considered an at-risk population. And when I say at-risk, I mean that the systemic barriers of colonization are very well alive in our communities, in our families, in our lives. So if off the bat, there is no sort of transparency about this decision-making processes and I guess the power that the young people have to shape and drive the program, it won't get too far in, I guess, success. So I had mentioned as well, a big part of the work that we do as the Georgian Bay Anishinaabe Youth is we rely very much so on feedback of participants. And so that very much ties into the decision-making processes. But as a team, we really, really focus on the measures of success. And this is kind of like the intangibles. And so it's the feelings and the emotions that the young people have being part of our program, what they feel when they leave the program. And when I say the program, I mean like the activity that we just finished or the event that we just hosted. And so a lot of young people are feeling more comfortable now with sharing those emotions, those different types of feedback. And for us, these are sort of indicators and measures of success. And it's quite, I don't even want to say like heartwarming, but almost unbelievable to hear how impactful our programming really is in terms of engagement. This right here, what you see on the screen is successful in terms of engagement for our program. A lot of young people feel a sense of belonging when they participate in our programs and our activities and our events. They feel like the space is safe and they can say what they need to say, but at the same time, in the realm of organizing, it's an ethical space. And that's what young people are saying, is that they are feeling that they are heard, they are feeling that they are respected, and that they are equal within the group. And then we go into sort of the long-term and sustained relationships. Each of the individuals that are in these photos here, those are all long-term participants. They have been part of the Georgian Bay Anishinaabe Youth since 2018. And like I had said, we work with youth ages 13 to 29. And that's a lot to ask, or to see that young people are continuing their relationships and their engagement in G-Bay specifically when they are within that age range. Because if you know some young people, perhaps teenagers or young adults, it's very hard, difficult. It's very difficult to sustain those long-term relationships. So it really does speak volumes to how important and impactful, but the success of engagement can really be on our project. And then, so with going, tying back into some of the other parts of our program, is that participants are identifying that they are returning to our programming and our events and activities because they are involved in the decision-making processes. And being involved in those decision-making processes is that my role as the staff is to ensure that those processes are as accessible as possible. So with respect to internet connectivity, it means that I am doing as much as I possibly can within my capacity to ensure that those young people are still being included. So some of our virtual programmings that we've done over the last year means I went to the post office and I mailed out materials, or I went and did deliveries to each person's house because not everybody has access to a vehicle. Or, you know, we sat outside and I used a hotspot on my phone just so we can connect on a device, a laptop, an iPad, or a phone. It's very important to demonstrate to the people that you work with that you really care and value their input and their continuity with the project. And so with that, we are sharing some professional work experience and expertise. Like I had said, all of the different pieces and pathways of mentorship and capacity building are they build into a larger puzzle of workplace employable skills, transferable skills, and all of the young people that we worked with are starting to see how their leadership roles and their decision-making processes, part of G-Bay, are impacting their educational lives, but also their professional lives as young Anishinaabe, young Indigenous people. And with that in mind, we are sharing a lot of cross-cultural knowledge and ensuring that the transmission of our knowledge as Anishinaabe people is continued in the light of a pandemic too. And, feedback from that has been incredible. But over and above all else is that working with young people is shaping the next generation of leaders. We are creating change makers. We are creating movers and shakers. And this is one of the most important, I want to say, aspects, but also pieces of motivation that drive our work, is that in order to continue the good work that we've done so far as G-Bay, but also within our communities, is to ensure that that knowledge is shared with as many people as we possibly can, and as many people that want to hear it. And that is it for me on youth engagement. So miigwech for listening. If you have any questions, I think now is the time. If I didn't go over too much.
No, you're all good. I think I started you late, which you would not be surprised at all by me. So, miigwech, Kyla, that's great. Really appreciate you taking the time, and just to acknowledge that you have certainly enriched the organization Georgian Bay Biosphere and me personally, and I'm very grateful for yours and all of the Georgian Bay Anishinaabe youth's efforts and work. And passion for this work and this territory. So miigwech. But yeah, we do have time to take some questions. If folks wanted to chat in, or if you want to raise your hand, we will monitor that. Okay. I have a question. Of all of the workshops that you've done online this past year, what has been your favorite online workshop that you did?
My favorite. The cooking workshop was probably the most challenging, so it was kind of fun in that aspect. So for our cooking workshop, we partnered up with Shawanaga First Nation and created these packages of food and like different cooking equipment, and we delivered them to participants. But in order to address the recipes for the workshop itself, we had created short videos on like tutorials on how to cook those foods. That was fun.
Awesome. That's great. All right. Thanks for that. If anybody wants to get in touch with Kyla and learn more, you can email her at culture@gbbr.ca, and we'll go from there. So again, Chimigoch, Kyla, and we're going to move on to our next speaker this time. So Jessica is ready to go, I think. Katrina, there we go, yeah. So thank you, Jessica, for being here. Just a quick introduction for Jessica. She's been working with rural landowners and farmers for the past 10 years, promoting stewardship and agricultural best management practices that minimize the impacts to water quality and boost soil health. She coordinates workshops, conferences, and community events to engage the local community and create opportunities for peer-to-peer learning and experiences. And if there's anything else you'd like to share as an introduction, by all means do so. Thanks so much for being here, Jessica.
Awesome. And you can hear me fine? Awesome. Thanks, Greg. Good morning. I am Jessica Vanswold, the Healthy Watershed Specialist at St. Clair Conservation. We are located at the very southern end of Lake Huron. Today I'm going to talk about a social media campaign that the Healthy Lake Huron technical team members coordinated last year. We continue to use that campaign as a basis for our online communications. The social media campaign centered on the idea that when it comes to maintaining a healthy Lake Huron, we are all a piece of the puzzle. Before I begin, I want to just give some background on Healthy Lake Huron itself. Healthy Lake Huron, Clean Water, Clean Beaches is a partnership that began back in 2011 to address shoreline water quality concerns of nuisance algae and bacterial issues, as well as to promote safe and clean beaches from Sarnia all the way up to Tobermory. The partnership has brought together representatives from the federal, provincial, and municipal governments, as well as local public health units, conservation authorities, and other local organizations. This group has worked together over the years to coordinate actions that are aimed at lowering the amount of phosphorus entering the lake and reducing the incidences of high levels of bacteria such as E. coli. There are 6 key watersheds that were prioritized for immediate actions. The map you see here is actually an older map. It only has 5 of the 6, so the Pine River in yellow, the Garvey Glen moving down the shoreline, Bayfield North, Main Bayfield, and Lambton Shores. And the 6 Streams Water Quality Initiative is the 6th one. Actions over the past 10 years have included the implementation of landowner stewardship projects, long-term water quality monitoring, as well as outreach. So members from each of the conservation authorities from Sarnia to Tobermory work as part of the Healthy Lake Huron technical team. And the staff at each CA collect water samples and will coordinate the landowner stewardship. Over the years, we've received funding from Environment and Climate Change Canada, the Ontario Ministry of Environment, Conservation and Parks, as well as the Ontario Ministry of Agriculture, Food and Rural Affairs. So one of the funding deliverables in one of our recent OMAFRA agreements was to explore innovative media. Generally, CA staff are well-versed in hosting workshops, meeting landowners one-on-one, and hosting field tours with farmers as a means to meet landowners and promote water quality action and soil health. So the goal of this OMAFRA activity was to develop innovative media to communicate stewardship messages and engage the community regarding soil health and water quality and adopted BMPs. It was quite timely. Who knew? So with the pandemic, we were unable to carry out our traditional outreach that we do. So this unplanned but necessary pivot to creating online content to connect with our local farmers and rural landowners was a really good kickstart in developing and continually exploring innovative media. So this past year, Healthy Lake Huron CA staff explored and used various social media creator software, filming tools, podcasts, infographics, and online presentations, to reach the broader Lake Huron community. So in the spring of 2020, we discussed how were we going to go about this campaign? Who is our target? How long would the campaign run for? What hashtags should we use? What topics should we cover? And so our goal was to tell the story of the Lake Huron watershed, to showcase how we all play a role in the health of Lake Huron. Our storyline was largely using the hashtags, we are all a piece of the puzzle from land to lake to keep a healthy Lake Huron. We used these hashtags whenever we posted to Facebook and Twitter, and we decided to run the campaign for 26 weeks, from April 1st to October 31st, under the broad categories of food, soil, water, beaches, nature, and community. At the time, we decided that although using the Healthy Lake Huron Facebook and Twitter accounts made the most sense as a common or unifying platform, that reach was really small compared to the collective platform of all the conservation authorities involved. We decided that each CA would post content to their own platforms with the appropriate hashtags and page tags, and other CAs in our technical team would then share and retweet to reach a broader audience, and they would do so following their own CA social media policies. The Healthy Lake Huron social media would also share and retweet whatever the CAs posted. We used the Healthy Lake Huron website as a home base for content, and any social media post, most of the social media posts we used would then drive traffic to the website when it was appropriate. So each week was a different topic under those broad 6 categories, with each CA being responsible for a different week. The other CAs could add content if they wanted, if they had the time and the availability, and we tried to coordinate topics that were relevant to the time of the year. Following slides that I'm going to show are just some examples of the various media tools that we worked with to engage the community. You have to remember, we are a technical team, more comfortable with face-to-face interactions and not graphics and social media. That is to say, this OMAFRA deliverable was actually a great opportunity to build our skills around creating meaningful online content and widening the reach of that Healthy Lake Huron messaging. So Saugeen Valley staff, they created storyboards as an introduction to future videos that were highlighted later on in the summer. In this particular story focus, Saugeen highlights the connection between water quality and pizza. Again, our goal was to show how important a healthy Lake Huron is in every aspect of our life. Generally, when one thinks of pizza, they're thinking about their favorite toppings. They're not thinking about how important it is for the water that is used in making the pizza to be suitable for human consumption. So then, following that storyboard a few weeks later, Saugeen Valley interviewed the small business owners within this particular case is the pizza restaurant owner. And these video interviews would ask what Lake Huron means to these small businesses, what it means to run a viable business based on the consistency of safe drinking water. And these video interviews were posted on the Healthy Lake Huron website, and social media posts, as I said, would drive traffic back to the website where people could watch the whole video. Our social media posts did not just focus on the benefits of healthy water. We also used this opportunity to highlight actions that individuals and communities are currently taking to minimize any impacts to Lake Huron water quality. So video interviews also included on-site demonstrations by members of the local community, like this video tour of the Brockton Community Garden. The members of this community garden have taken steps to improve water infiltration and make their gardens more accessible. And the goal for us was to inspire other small communities to consider implementing similar practices. And staff from Asabo Bayfield, Ross Wilson here, he prepared in-field videos directed to the agricultural community, discussing how cover crops contribute to water quality as well as benefiting soil health, which is important for crop growth. Maitland Valley pulled together these really wonderful crop tours. I am seeing lots of comments popping up. I don't know if I should stop or if people can hear me.
No, you're all good, Jess.
Oh, wonderful. Thanks. Sorry, Maitland Valley pulled together these wonderful 360-degree tours of a demonstration farm. And so while we couldn't meet on farm last summer, they were able to bring the farm to the computer. So they had write-ups for each of the photos that they posted so that the participant knew what they were looking at. They included before and after photos of swales empty and then a bank full. I'd really encourage you to check it out. Oops. You can check it out either on our Healthy Lake Huron website. I think it's just, I should have just put the simple thing. I think this is the, oh yeah, I have it here, sorry. If you go to healthylakehuron.ca, you should be able to find it, or this is a direct link to the video or to the tour. Understanding water infiltration of your soil is important as a farmer, also if you are a gardener. Ample water infiltration helps crops grow during the droughty parts of the summer, but more importantly, water infiltration reduces overland runoff that can carry sediment and nutrients to nearby watercourses that eventually empty into Lake Huron. Maitland Valley created a handy infographic that highlights the steps involved in how you can determine your own soil's ability to infiltrate water. Again, you can find that on our website. Another one of our projects, again, trying to connect things that you don't necessarily think of we connected the beverage industry to water quality and sustainability. So this St. Clair reached out to all the breweries, cider houses, and wineries from Sarnia to Tobermory, inquiring what practices they do to conserve water or reduce their footprint. We included all the companies from Sarnia to Tobermory on the map, but we did individual highlight posts on the different companies that were implementing different best management practices. It was a great opportunity last summer during the pandemic to support local Lake Huron companies that were implementing stewardship and actively minimizing their impact to water quality. So using these companies' social media links definitely broadened our reach of this individual topic. And some companies had already created media on their own, highlighting their sustainable practices. So we were able to take already created media and share it. We also tried a Facebook Live event where Davin Heimbach and Tim Cumming from ABCA did this video during the Ontario Family Fishing Week to encourage familial connections to the lake to build those family memories. And as you can see, we had some good viewership of over 700 views. Ross Wilson again did an agricultural focused podcast on the agriculture show in September, talking again about cover crops and making them work. This post is not so much an example of the post itself, but an example of the new connections that we made. It allowed us to reach out to different communities, such as the Métis Nation of Ontario and its local chapters, and learn from them, but also hear what Lake Huron means to the Métis Nation of Ontario, as well as the different groups and communities that we reached out to. And I personally learned a lot from the communities that I connected with. While this campaign was to build CA capacity regarding innovative media, I believe the project itself really lent itself nicely to create and build relationships across many communities across the Lake Huron watershed. Now, just for some numbers, as a group, we posted 91 posts on the Healthy Lake Huron Facebook page between April and October. Our reach over that time was just shy of 43,000 people, with our total impressions being almost 53,000. We started in April last year with 40 followers on our Healthy Lake Huron Facebook page. By November, we are up to 214. I just checked last week. We are up to 426. I think I checked this morning, 430. So we are starting to grow. And our page likes, we increased from 38 all the way to 186 during our main focus of the campaign. And now, like I said, again, we're up to 380. For Twitter, we posted 95 tweets. That's just on the Healthy Lake Huron Twitter page itself. There were an additional 129 tweets and retweets from team members, and the analytics from those 95 tweets showed that we had nearly 44,000 impressions, and we had 363 people check out our profile. And during that April to October timeframe, we had 30 new followers, and since then we've added another 17. Now, it is important to evaluate the campaign for any successes, to see how we can grow and how we can improve and how we can continue to build on that Lake Huron messaging. So our following started small. So that takes time to gain momentum and gain followers. But our following grew over the course of the campaign. And even since October, we have been continuing to post, but at a reduced rate. Our numbers continue to grow. And that has given us the impetus to keep going, divide up the post responsibilities amongst the different CAs and keep that going to continue providing relevant water quality and stewardship information on our social media channels. From a capacity building perspective, this campaign, I would say, was a resounding success. Each team member involved strengthened their communication and graphic skills. It is not an easy task to take difficult or new to a layperson concepts and convey them in 180 characters or less, or in a visually engaging manner. It really took time and, I wouldn't say research, but it took effort to craft what the message we wanted in a visually engaging, short, meaningful way. From a networking perspective, this campaign was also quite a success, in my opinion. The Healthy Lake Huron tech team reached far beyond our typical stakeholders to engage, learn, and share from. And we are able to share the efforts of local groups and industries. Now, by connecting with these smaller groups and non-typical industries that are not directly focused on water quality or conservation, we could widen our messaging reach. For example, if working with Dairy Farmers of Ontario, the DFO is focused on supporting farmers or dairy farmers and encourages growing perennial crops such as alfalfa or hay that not only provides feed for livestock, but also stabilizes soil and reduces erosion. This practice benefits the farmer's livelihood or bottom line, but it also contributes to a Healthy Lake Huron. So if the Healthy Lake Huron team has that relationship with Dairy Farmers of Ontario, not Fisheries and Oceans, Canada, we can work on crafting similar messaging that has a broader reach. So that brings me to our lessons learned. Lessons we learned as a group of technical staff from this campaign may well be known and understood by social media experts, so please extend us some grace there. But I share these lessons in case other organizations are looking to build their platforms. Posts that resonate with people or posts that people can identify with, such as beer and pizza, they're going to have a further reach, as will posts with a call to action. There are many free online social media software tools that can assist in creating visually stimulating posts. Make use of them. I personally enjoyed Canva. It's very simple. After this campaign, looking back, we have realized that recording analytics and metrics is definitely easier if you use one account to generate the posts and tweets and share from there. It just helps getting those numbers. So if you're looking to increase reach and engagement, we did find that boosting posts is quite inexpensive and can broaden your reach, but definitely use wisely and include a call to action. Use relevant to audience hashtags. So if you're tweeting to farmers or talking about agriculture, include on ag or soil health. Or if you're talking about something more broadly about Lake Huron animals or fish, use established hashtags like Wildlife Wednesday or Fishy Friday. And it can also help if you tag relevant companies and organizations that already have those large followings and ask them to request that they retweet or share what you're posting. One of the big lessons we learned, or something we've taken away as we've reflected on the successes of the campaign and the communities we've engaged with, is scale matters. Addressing ecosystem-wide issues requires scale. As we investigated topics for the campaign, it was and is apparent that across the Lake Huron region, there are many smaller groups and local groups that are working hard to maintain a healthy Lake Huron. Smaller groups can be more nimble and they can promote and activate change at that local level. At times, though, there is the possibility that smaller groups or different industries can work in silos, not knowing that others are completing similar tasks. And in some cases, smaller groups can be more transient. Implementing a regional approach with networks to those smaller groups and those different industries provides the opportunity for all Lake Huron stakeholders to collaborate so that together we can have a wider breadth of messaging and impact. We can reduce messaging and effort overlap. Collaboration at that regional level also allows that big picture mindset, or the taking a step back, and provides the opportunity to observe trends in water quality concerns and land use changes at that regional scale. For example, like 10 years ago, E. coli was a major health concern for the lake. At the time, there were more livestock on the landscape than there are today. Now at the regional level, we can also see that there is it's very important to consider soil movement and the carrying of nutrients from the land to the lake. Working with smaller groups, we can use the data and trends observed and collected at the regional level to promote that local action. Next steps for our social media campaign. Although the campaign officially ended in October, we have continued to keep a presence on Facebook and Twitter to keep our new followers engaged. We have committed, as all of the CAs involved, to commit at least one post per week and one post per CA per month. We can definitely do more than that, but that's just so that we have that regularity happening. We have topics and themes scheduled all the way up until December of this year. And again, they're centering on those 6 topics from that we focused on last year. And our plan is to continue to highlight water quality related posts and actions of both seasonal and local importance. And if anyone, this is a little call to action here, if anyone is, anyone participating today has an idea or wants to highlight what your community is doing, please connect with me and we will coordinate something to post on Healthy Lake Huron page. Thanks, and I will take questions.
Thanks so very much, Jess. We do have time for 1 or 2 questions if folks want to put something into the chat box. I think I might know the answer, but I'm kind of curious while we're looking for questions. What was your most popular post? The beer, some of the beer ones and some of the pizza ones. Yeah. That's great. And then I'll just, again, while we're waiting for folks, if you can put into the chat, but what was the most challenging aspect about kind of over the last year and a half in terms of working on this collaborative initiative?
I think, I wouldn't say it was a bad thing. It was definitely a challenge with each conservation authority. Each CA has their own social media policy or how, like a standard operating procedure, for lack of a better phrase, of how they post things to social media, what they include, what they don't include, and just trying to coordinate between not trying to take over someone else's role within the CA, but trying to coordinate what we were hoping to accomplish and coordinate with the social media coordinators within each CA. I think took a little time, but we figured it out.
Awesome. That's great. There's a question in the chat, which is from Terry Reese. Thanks, Terry. So it takes a lot of effort to stay on top of social media. how do you fit the new obligations of the work that you're doing right now into already busy schedules?
I personally, I will quickly take a scan of Twitter when I start work every morning. That's me, just to see, it's Twitter and Facebook, just to see if anything is pressing. And I think a quick cursory scan can also remind you, oh, it's pollinator week. Oh, we didn't have that scheduled. Maybe we can pull something together quickly for that. I personally love online engagement. I think it's like, especially if I find something really interesting. Like just recently I learned that blue jays aren't really blue. It has to do with light scattering and wavelength absorption. I was like, whoa, that's something I think the average person would find interesting. So I will try relate it. That isn't totally related to Lake Huron, but just as an example of coming up with or seeing nuggets of information that would be relevant to people, trying to package it and put it out. Some can be done relatively quickly, some takes more time for sure if you're putting together a video or an infographic, but a quick tweet can still get you connected with your followers.
Perfect. Thanks so much. There is a question from Jody McKenna that's there, and just in the interest of time, just because we've run a little bit over at this point, if you're able to quickly respond in chat, and also this is I think it's a great question to carry into the breakout room afterwards, but the question is around, was there a way to action or to connect connection with followers who showed more interest than just a like towards on the ground stewardship? And I think it's around that. How do we connect activity on social media into action on the ground and that kind of stuff? So if you're able to take that to your panel discussion later, that'd be great for us. And I'm just going to tell everybody to help Jess out. We can get over 500 for you. Go and follow up.
Thanks.
Thanks so much, Jessica, and really appreciated the work that you're doing, and also appreciate sort of the complexity and also the time that you've put into it. Delving into social media collaboration is definitely worthwhile, but also a challenge. So great work, and thanks so much. So,
thank you.
We are going to move on to our next presenter, who's going to talk about community contributions and Canadian-Indigenous collaboration. So we have Elaine Ho here. She's in the final month of her PhD. Congratulations. It's in social and ecological sustainability, specializing in integrated water management at the University of Waterloo. She's starting a postdoctoral fellowship at Algoma University next week. That's fantastic. She's a research associate at the Northern Ontario Research Development Ideas and Knowledge, or Nordic Institute at Algoma University, and the project coordinator for the new Lake Huron Collaborative based at the Sault Ste. Marie Innovation Center. She'll be speaking to us today about her past and current work with community members and organizations, including First Nations and communities in freshwater quality monitoring and collaboration. Elaine, thanks so much for your time. And if there's more to your introduction that I missed, then by all means take the opportunity now to do that, and look forward to hearing from you.
Thanks, Greg. That was quite a mouthful of an intro, so I apologize for that. So I won't add to that. I will say that I am taking the perspective of a non-Indigenous person, which I am. And so when I'm talking about Canadian-Indigenous collaboration, the reason why I am taking this approach to actually presenting about this is because I found that a lot of folks from the Western perspective recognize the importance of engaging with Indigenous communities and are at the point where they would like to do so, but are often feeling like they are not equipped to do so, or that they are lacking some strategy. They just don't know how to go about it. So I have found in the past that it has been helpful for some to hear how myself and others have gone about it. And so that's where some of this presentation is going to stem from. I'm also in the Robinson Huron Treaty Territory and in the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe peoples. I'm from Sault Ste. Marie right now, presenting from Sault Ste. Marie. And I'm going to start with just a rephrasing of some language because I think language is important. So when we're talking about collaboration, we're not really talking about in my view, consultation or just saying, oh yeah, I talked to some folks, and so, it's a collaborative project. I'm speaking more about a sense of togetherness. And when I say togetherness, I'm thinking of, I don't know if you've read the Great Lakes letter from the fall, I believe it was. IJC Commissioner Dr. Henry Lickers wrote a piece for that. And it is online and you don't need a subscription to download it. But he spoke about the Great Law of Peace and embodying the principles of respect, equity, empowerment in the work that you do. And I think that the way that he described that was a really good way for people to understand, some people to understand how to move forward in an equitable way with projects, especially as it relates to water, which is so personal and important to so many people. Also looking at the Tura Wampum, the two white lines on the beaded belt that represent, together but separate. And so recognizing the unique identities of different peoples, but being able to work alongside each other. So when I'm talking about collaboration, I'm using it very broadly in that respect. Also looking at the word marginalized, which is a word I take issue with and have been speaking about this since 2018. So when we talk about marginalized communities and collaborating with marginalized communities, it makes it sound like their perspectives don't actually exist as part of the main fabrics of society. And so they're kind of an on to the side type of thing. And I know that's not the intent behind the terminology, but I think if we start using language that is more active, such as excluded, it demonstrates that we recognize it has been a conscious decision not to include certain parties. And so it changes the way that we approach relationship building and the way we approach discussions to recognize that we have actually been personally responsible for the way we've acted in the past. And so that recognition is important. And then finally, inclusivity is a word that is very often used, and I totally appreciate the word and what the intent is behind it. However, it also can mean inviting people into a space that was not designed for them, which in some ways defeats the purpose of the whole concept of inclusivity. So I tend to prefer the words, shared ethical space, just shared space, however you want to phrase that. There's different terminologies, but just to recognize that there's a differentiation there. So when we talk about actions, I'm going to actually lead with some of the things that I've learned from collaborations in the past and then go into some examples and then some current work as well. The first being co-create. And this is so important and it seems like such a simple concept. It's really challenging to implement well. It's essentially, you don't come into a space saying, oh, I have this idea for a project that I'd like to implement. It's more, what can I bring to the table? Who else is at the table or who else should be at the table? What can we all bring and what is needed here? And then how can we each use our skills and our abilities and our networks and such to make sure that something that we all need and can appreciate and can benefit from can be implemented. Ethics should be considered and addressed. This is something that is very inherent to a lot of what we do, and we don't often pause and consciously discuss whose ethics we are working according to. And this came up actually in my PhD research when this is a very obvious example, in research at universities, you have to go through an ethics process. And it is pretty well always a very Western approach to ethics. And I had to push back a little bit because there's a written consent that they tend to prefer. But when I was working with Indigenous partners, it did not leave a good taste in some people's mouths for me to come into the community and say, look, here's a 4-page information letter that you need to read and sign a contract at the end saying that you're going to agree for me to use your information if, whatever. Like, that's not how relationship building works in real life. So being able to push back on certain parts of ethics where needed is an important thing that we might want to think about depending on who we're working with and how we're functioning in those spaces. Reciprocity has to be within program scope, and that's with any partners. This is not just with Canadian-Indigenous communities, although it's especially important in those situations. And an example from my own past work is a youth engagement that I'm going to talk about in a moment that brought forward young people's perspectives on their relationships with water, which was intended to be shared with local water managers, specifically with the Conservation Authority. And the Conservation Authority wanted to hear it, but they had not planned to do anything in return for the community. So when we asked if they could display the artworks that the young people were making, which was the format in which they were sharing a lot of their perspectives, there was a whole, brouhaha about, oh, well, we got to go to our, our board of directors and make sure that we can promote this here, and because it could be seen as a political thing. I'm like, what the heck? Like, it was just one way out of proportion, and that ended up, that piece of it, the sharing with the managers, and that whole piece ended up being a little bit, was not really much of an included part of the project in the end, although we still went forward with the project, as you will see. So thinking about what that might look like, and recognizing that you may not know what reciprocity might look like. So when you start building relationships with people, with organizations, with communities, you may find that later on they have something to ask of you that hopefully you'll be able to implement, act upon. However, you may not have that within the scope of the program. And so having flexibility in terms of how you function is also a really important consideration. And ensuring the logistical infrastructure is present is super important. What I mean by that is are there pathways, are there known pathways for community members, for organizations to be able to access the people, the information, the resources they need? And if not, how can we make those pathways more accessible? And Kyla spoke a little bit to some of that. So finally, recognizing multiple ways of knowing, and this is a big part of where my PhD thesis was, of the work that was in my PhD thesis, but also moving forward in project implementation, understanding that when we're talking about, for example, I'm going to speak about riparian areas and assessing watershed quality or water quality. There is more than one way. There's more than 10 ways to understand what that system is telling us, and looking at different aspects of the system, looking at different aspects of ourselves, recognizing that there's a really holistic perspective out there that can be built from multiple perspectives, but also that it may be something that is completely foreign to us that we don't even know exists yet. So again, keeping an open mind and being flexible in terms of exploring those opportunities. So those are the basics for setting ourselves up for action in this area. I do want to provide a couple of previous examples before moving on to some current examples. These came out of my PhD research, first being a partnership with an organization called Waterlution. It's a national nonprofit, and they led a 3-year program called Great Art for Great Lakes, where they engaged with over 1,000 members of the public each year, both Canadian and Indigenous, to co-create permanent public art installations in their communities. You can see some examples of some photos of some of them here. And the idea was to use the arts as a way to bring people together and do something that they felt is meaningful in their community, because they can go and visit and show their family and their friends after, look, I contributed to that. But while they were in that space, it was a way to talk about the issues related to the water, talk about how we relate to the water, talk about what we can do moving forward. So some examples from this screen on the left, you see these are the two of the artists that collaborated to lead some workshops. It's Logan Stats and Rob Lamoth. They worked with a lot of public schools as well as some members of the public as well to write a song they literally called Song for the Water, and it's online. There's also in the top right corner a graffiti art piece that folks did. They came in and learned how to do graffiti art. That was primarily the background. The foreground is something that the artist did herself and overlaid on top. And then there's wood burning in the bottom right corner, combined with some art from the artist himself, and that is Water Mother. And some other examples. This is one that I helped to influence the design of the project, and this is a sturgeon. So the watershed we were looking at is Lake Erie, and we were in the Eastern Basin where the Grand River is the main river system flowing into Lake Erie. And there's a dam in the estuary of that river, which is uncommon. And I won't say anything else beyond that, but it's not the smartest thing ecologically speaking to do. And so we have these amazing prehistoric fish that are massive and really quite a wonder to see, that typically or would conventionally want to spawn in that river, and they return to the rivers they come from, by the way, or they tend not to breed. So they have been coming up to the dam trying to get past it to go up into the river for the past few decades and haven't been able to get in. So we're losing the sturgeon from our stream. So this was used as a symbol to talk about not just representation of the issue, but a symbol of what we hope can change in the future. And in the center of the fish, you'll see the outside is mosaic glass tiles. In the center is the outline of Lake Erie, and we used plastic that was collected from the beach of Long Point Biosphere Reserve to create scales for the fish. And I know that sturgeon don't actually technically have scales, they have skin, but that aside, it's a representation for the members of the public to be able to come and communicate to each other about what they're doing. And at the same time, look at the actual plastics and say, oh my God, like half of this stuff is stuff that I use every day in my homes. Like it hit a lot of people pretty hard, which was the intent. So another collaboration was with young people from Six Nations of the Grand River. And they came together. There were 12 artists who came together to produce 30 pieces of artwork that were then put into a virtual art exhibit. Initially, this was supposed to be an art tour across 5 cities over 6 months. But then, of course, COVID happened, so we switched into a virtual exhibit. And along with this came a lot of outreach. So we had magazines, industry news. The Conversation is an international news outlet that is increasingly being used by a lot of folks, including decision makers. And we also had the attention of the Minister of Diversity, Inclusion and Youth, the Honorable Bardish Chagger, who wanted to meet with the youth to talk about how Canada could move forward in a more collaborative way with at a local scale with Indigenous persons to address the issues that are meaningful to them. Unfortunately, due to connectivity issues on reserve, we weren't able to have a virtual meeting with the young people. So we're on hold for that to wait till we can actually meet in person. And some examples of the artwork in this piece are here. You can see there's a whole diverse array from painting to sketches to beadwork. There's virtual collages. These were often accompanied by write-ups that sometimes described a traditional teaching, sometimes were a personal reflection on teaching, sometimes were just a reflection on something they'd seen in the news and they were upset about. Issues covered were anywhere from plastic pollution, as you can see in the top left there, to, again, preserving cultural teachings and sharing those, as well as talking about things like missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls, and talking about the drinking water issue on reserve. So there was a vast array of concepts and perspectives that were presented in this piece. And it goes to show how integrated water is throughout our society and throughout our lives, as well as how interconnected all the issues are. And so if that's something of interest, it is linked in this slide, and I can put the link in the chat later too, if it's of interest to folks. But those are just some past examples. And now moving forward, what we are talking about a little bit today is the Lake Huron Collaborative, which is a fairly new, I don't want to call it an organization, maybe a fairly new network of partners across the North Channel of Lake Huron. Our purpose is to improve collaboration and coordination between local watershed-focused activities in Lake Huron's North Channel. So we have a core group of partners, but we also have folks that we reach out and work with to collaboratively implement projects and share resources and share outreach and all that to ensure that projects can be successful across the North Channel. And the activities are primarily informational, local scale action, and also working together to resource our projects. So funding applications are often more successful when you've got multiple partners involved, for example. So we try to work together to make sure that we can empower each other to be as successful as possible in achieving those resources. The goal is to support the Lake Huron Lakewide Action Management Plan, the Canada-Ontario Agreement, and or the Lake Huron Nearshore Assessment. But in addition to these, there can also be other objectives that we talk about, like with the 2012 Great Lakes Strategy, the Great Lakes Protection Act, and the Great Lakes Program Logic Model, anticipated outcomes. There's all kinds of different things that we could potentially be contributing to. These are our 5 core partners. I think Chuck is still on the line from Central Algoma Freshwater Coalition. I did see Carter from Kensington Conservancy. I don't know if he's still on. David is here from RAIN. So we have a few different organizations that are the main partners, but again, we are always looking for others to work with. So if you're interested in collaborating on funding applications, on project implementation, anything like that, please feel free to reach out to us and we'd be more than happy to discuss that with you. Some examples of some of our recent projects. My computer is frozen. There we go. include, we recently did some riparian planting to try and reduce erosion at a local farm. And so that's one of the things is that we like to try to work with landowners where possible to talk about how they can play their own role in basically the collective impact of our community members when it comes to conserving and improving water quality. There's also educational materials that we work on. These are 2 examples that we did recently, and we'll be looking to create others. We have a 10-minute demo of benthos and benthic invertebrate sampling, as well as a 20-minute walkthrough of a take-home water pollution test kit that people can order online and take it home and do it in the kitchen kind of thing. So we're trying to make things a little bit more accessible and let people know that there are different opportunities for them to explore their water resources and explore the science of it in ways that are fun and not so daunting. So basically demystifying the science in a way. So those are just some of the examples, and we are fairly new, so we are looking for other projects to work on and would be happy to connect with anybody who is interested. So that's all for me. Thank you.
That was great, Elaine. Thank you so very much for that presentation. I would love to be able to get up closer with some of that art. That was absolutely stunning. So I just if there was any questions for Elaine at this time. She's unfortunately, I understand, unable to join us in the breakout rooms later. So now's your chance.
I've switched my schedule, and I will be here for the breakout rooms.
Oh, well, then never mind. Everybody can go quiet on you. So no, I'm kidding. That's great. That's really fantastic. Do we have any questions for Elaine? I do have a question. I'm just kind of curious in terms of your shift from University of Waterloo up to the Sioux.
Mm-hmm.
Are you going to be continuing some of that same kind of work in your academics? And
yes. So I do see a question about the water pollution kits. I will put that in the chat. But to your question, Greg, yes, I'm starting. So it's interesting you asked that, because to my earlier points about co-creation, the way that my postdoc research actually came about was we came up with a project with the local community first, and the research was developed after to support the project. So I didn't come in saying, I want to research this, how can we implement this? It was more, I spoke to Chief Rickard of Garden River First Nation, and I asked him, I said, I'm moving to this area. Water is really important to me. I don't care if it's about me or anything else. I just want to help make this, this area better. And this is the skill that I can bring. And how can I support the needs of your community? Even if it's sending you to someone else in my network, I'm happy to do that. Right. And so he came up with some ideas. He's like, no, water is something that we really want to look at, and we don't have the capacity to. So we developed an idea to do a pilot water quality monitoring program in the community to train community members to be able to test their own water quality, and then own that data and control that information, and to be able to then be informed when they go to their local authorities to try and have those discussions, or the local industry, or whatever the case may be. So we're developing that pilot program right now. It's a community-led, two-eyed seeing program. So we're going to be integrating the science piece with cultural and traditional and community-based knowledge. I'm not sure how that's going to look yet, because we're just starting it this month. So it's going to be evolving and being put together as we go. So I am building on this work to try and carry forward that community co-creation, kind of bringing together different people. There's going to be a youth engagement element. We may also incorporate the arts in, depending on what community members ask for. Again, that's part of the flexibility, right? Is I haven't determined at the onset what this project's going to look like. We have a sense that we've come together with, but it's going to be really, as people get engaged, what they want to see it become, it's going to become. So
yeah, that's fantastic. Thanks for that. There are a couple of questions in the chat box around the water pollution kits. One from Kirk and one from Saya.
I'll put the links.
And then I'm not sure. The question from Gregory is: are there ongoing programs looking to expand their testing parameters at this time or in the near future? We'll take that last question.
Yeah, the ongoing programs, Gregory. Which ongoing programs are you referring to?
Benthos monitoring, you're saying.
So you're talking about, okay. So the benthos monitoring that we're going to do in our pilot program is loosely based on the OBBN protocol. It's not following it to the T. This pilot program that we're doing this summer is to get people to start thinking about water quality and getting into the practice of being in the stream and interacting with the water system and looking at parameters and understanding what numbers mean. So we're not strictly following the protocols right now. Next year, hopefully, we're hoping to start. The benthos monitoring, as far as I know, and I could be wrong about this, as far as I know, they're not expanding anything right now in terms of parameters. Chris Jones would know a lot more about that, but last I spoke to him was last year, and he, at the time, he was just going to continue the program. But of course, he's always interested in learning more, and he's always considering other things, so it may evolve. I don't know if Ted might have any thoughts on that also, but in terms of the local water quality monitoring, in the Garden River community, they have very limited monitoring that they do right now. It's primarily beach monitoring to make sure that the beaches are safe to swim at. So they're looking to create an ongoing baseline, and they have been inundated over the last year or so with hundreds and hundreds of incredible amount of proposals from industry to come in and mine and forest. And so they're going through all of these gradually in their territory. And the Sioux area right now in general is kind of a hotspot for people or organizations, industry coming in and honing in on where they want to develop. It's kind of the next place to develop, it seems to be, up in this area. So there's a lot of potential collaboration, potential impacts. So this is kind of the time to really start thinking about, well, if we're going to move forward, and there's no reason why we can't move forward with some of these industries, what are the conversations we need to have around, in their case, the impact benefit agreements, and how we can incorporate the needs of the community and the health of the community's members, which is tied directly with the health of the water system, of course. How can we get that consideration tied into some of the activities that are being proposed at this time? So I'll leave it at that. My long-winded answer.
No, that was great. Thanks, Elaine, and thanks too for being able to come in on the workshop or the breakout rooms. Pardon me. And I also just want to express appreciation for you starting your presentation just around language and clarification of meaning of language. It's so very important, and thanks for taking that time with us today. Next up, we have a presentation for engaging local government and its leaders. They aren't all the same. This is going to be a presentation by Nigel Bellchamber. He's been a city commissioner of finance and administration, a county chief administrative officer, a municipal association executive for the last 20 years. He's a consultant to and a trainer for municipalities and local boards. He has his own practice and is also principal in the firm of Amberley Gavel Limited. His work includes CAO and senior staff recruitment, and he has served as a closed meeting investigator, municipal ombudsman, and integrity commissioner. He covers all of Ontario, and indeed, I met him here in Parry Sound through our work with Georgian Bay. And he's worked with hundreds of municipalities from Kenora to Kirkland Lake to Kingsville, and most places in between. Nigel, thanks so much for taking the time to be with us today, and I very much look forward to your presentation. Are you there, Nigel?
Okay, am I live now?
You're live now.
I'm good. Thank you very much, Greg. Appreciate it very much, and it's great to go last because I get to hear what everyone else has said and come up with a couple of suggestions. Before I forget, Jessica, I think I was captivated by your work with all of those different breweries up and down the shoreline. I think perhaps by September, we could organize a bus tour and a highway bus to visit all of these places to make sure that they're still following up with all of their good promises. And Greg, we can end up in Parry Sound at the Trestle Brewery, hosted by you. I think that would be just perfect for the participants in today's session, just to see what people are doing. Anyway, that gives you an indication of where my mind goes. I'm going to talk about municipal engagement or local government engagement from two perspectives. One as a former municipal official, but also as a member of the Ashfield Colborne Lakeshore Association, which spans two geographic townships that roughly coincide with the western shoreline of the Maitland Valley Conservation Authority and the half of what was the Huron County Health Unit. Those are two, again, municipal organizations. They're classified as local boards. So I'm going to talk about municipal engagement, and I'll interweave, if I can, some stories from the last. And I think it now is getting close to 40 years in terms of the involvement. So just let me follow through here. There's two things I think you need to remember about engaging local government. In fact, I think about any kind of permanent engagement you wish to enter into is what shared goals and key influencers. What are your shared goals and who are the key influencers? And I'll come back to that and explain why I put those two things. But I think those are the two things that are important to remember. So like any other training exercise or academic exercise, I start off with what is the definition of engagement? And obviously, if you go to the dictionary, it's interesting. It gives you three really solid examples. It might be warfare. We use the term engagement. They're engaged in battle. An employment agreement. Somebody's been hired. They've been engaged. And in fact, it comes from the French to engager, to hire. Or betrothal, quite frankly, and engagement. It's a mutual promise between two parties for some future activity. But whatever definition you choose, engagement is about arrangement whereby each party has something they wish to gain from an engagement. Usually it's mutually beneficial. The engagement that comes out of warfare, not just warfare being, we hope, some kind of peace treaty, will be mutually beneficial if it's going to be effective engagement. And we could debate that for some time about various treaties, but if you think in terms of warfare, more successful efforts are treaties rather than defeats. So we're going to talk about engagement. There's got to be mutual benefit for effective engagement to occur. So what about municipalities? Well, they're not all the same. There's 444 in Ontario today. Some are rural, some are urban, some's a mixture of rural and urban. And quite frankly, after the major amalgamations that took place in 1998, the typical municipality definition no longer applied. There's as many different forms, styles, and arrangements as you can think of. They also tend to be made up of different mixes of population. Might be seasonal population, might be permanent population only, predominant, or it might be a mix, or you can have permanent population with a heavy concentration of commuters. That too can have an impact. Similarly, the economic mix. Where do people earn their incomes? Where does the revenue come from? And it's different, whether it's farming, whether it's industrial, whether it's government oriented, whether it's tourism oriented, there's again a different mix. And then to complicate it, we have different municipal structures. We've got upper tier municipalities. Those are counties and regions across the province: Huron County, Lambton County, Bruce County, in our watershed anyway. You get into Muskoka, it's a district. It's an upper tier. You get lower tiers. These are the participant municipalities within upper tiers, and there's shared responsibility for services. Then to complicate it even further, we've got single tier municipalities. So we've got things like the Township of the Archipelago. We've got the town of Parry Sound. Those are single tiers. There is no upper tier. They're all the responsibilities fall upon those lower tier municipalities. It's a complex setup in Ontario, and you can't automatically assume that a municipality is one or the other. In the Great Lakes watershed, the Lake Huron watershed, or the Healthy Lake Huron project watershed in Southern Ontario, Chatham-Kent, which is formerly was a two-tier setup with upper tiers and lower tiers. It's a single-tier municipality covering a large geographic area. So don't assume that the structure is the same everywhere. And that difference in structure will have an impact on the services that they deliver. And there's about 100 different service areas that a municipality can be in. Everything from animal control to airports to zoos, quite frankly. You can do the whole alphabet. It's difficult to come up with something that starts with X, but you can find every other letter of the alphabet, whether it's childcare, whether it's museums, whether it's beaches, whether it's just the wide range of activities, drainage, water, drinking water, source water protection, all of those different activities will in part come under a municipal umbrella in some way or another. Then to further complicate it, they have local boards. And in some cases, there are conservation authorities that cover parts of Ontario. And in other places, there are no conservation authorities. You know that well up in the West Parry Sound District. We also have boards of health, or health units as they're sometimes called. Those are important players as well. And at least they have been in our particular jurisdiction with the Ashfield Colborne Lakeshore Association and what's gone on in Huron County. Now, I need to tell you a little bit about ACLA, the Ashfield Colborne Lakeshore Association. I'll just give you a little bit of a background. Started, I think its genesis was with an individual in the 1980s, a gentleman named Jeff Walker, who was particularly concerned about data that was being gathered by the health unit at the time that in turn had alarmed the medical officer of health, a gentleman named Dr. Harry Seisler. And Harry was quite concerned about the state of the beaches along the Huron County Lakeshore. They were showing high levels of E. coli. The beach testing requirements that were under the legislation were relatively minimal. Dr. Seisler expanded those to include all of the commonly used public beaches in Huron County. And he was quite concerned that they showed significant levels of E. coli to the point where they ended up posting permanently under his successor all Huron County beaches as unsafe for swimming under certain predictable conditions. Part of this was meshed in and led to, in part, the Clean Up Rural Beaches program, but that's a long ago initiative. That engagement led to a greater degree of interest. Jeff passed away, but besides engaging with the health unit, the conservation authority, and provincial ministries became engaged in part with the concerns, and include the Sauble Bayfield in the south as well. But the first reaction when municipal leaders were approached was that, well, sure, the problem is seasonal septics. Your septics are failing, and what you've got in the water is E. coli from your septic systems. Clean it up. So the Lakeshore Association said, fine, if you think it's local septics, we'll demonstrate that it's not. And if it is, then we'll clean them up. So there was an active program between the health unit and the Ashfield Colborne Lakeshore Association in particular to cover the entire shoreline, to map septics, to provide septic education, to determine where there outbreaks were, and to deal with the issue. At the same time, there was engagement with the federal government in their inland waters branch, because they had an interest in that, to determine if they had any data. So they did some testing, and at the same time, the septic inspection program, it was voluntary. I came up with one failing system along a 30-kilometer stretch. And that failing system was, in fact, voluntarily noted by one brother who couldn't get his other brother to invest in a repair for the shared cottage. But the long and the short of it was that neither the federal data nor the inspection program demonstrated that there was a significant problem from septics, or of any kind. And in fact, went a long way to enhancing the septic inspection system. At the same time, with the support of the Conservation Authority and the support of the Lakeshore Association, and one individual in particular, a fellow who just passed away last year, Mike McElhone, there was an ongoing program of stream testing to monitor a series of streams and rivers along the lakeshore to determine whether or not the source of E. coli was coming from inland, and to do that measurement. And I think that measurement, with cooperation from the local township as well, in terms of financial contributions for a portion of the cost, and the association and the supporting kind of the Conservation Authority, lasted for about 17 years. During that period of time, there was some pretty solid data that was indicating that at certain times of the year and under certain conditions, we were seeing significant flushing of E. coli off the land, which again was supportive of what the conservation authorities were trying to do. At the same time, it became evident to the municipal councils that there was more to it than just failing septics, and we engaged the local councillors, and in particular the heads of council that were interested, usually through their participation as members of the Conservation Authority as well, because they when they joined the CA board, they gained a broader knowledge. So I'm just going to back away from the story at the moment, because it doesn't end there. But don't assume that you can just approach the council without preparation, because they represent a large number of interests, not just yours, the ones that you happen to have in mind. And you have to prepare. You have to make sure that you've got data. You've got to know what your interest is, what do you want from them, and you have to figure out how can you make it mesh with the municipality or the municipal council's interest. So what's the best way to do that? Well, do a little research in advance. What does their strategic plan say? What are their key pillars or key goals? If you're dealing with the township of the archipelago, the water quality in Georgian Bay is #1 on their priority. That makes it clear how you engage with the township of the archipelago. It may not hold the same for their neighboring municipalities in terms, they may have a different strategic interests. Take a look at what their operational plans and budgets say. Where do they spend their money, quite frankly? And how does your interest match up with how they spend their money? I note that there's been very successful work done between GBB and the township of the archipelago. In fact, I think it's evolved into some award-winning work in terms of some road reconstruction efforts and how they have put the environmental interests front and center. So congratulations on that one, Greg. The real question is, what benefit can you provide to the municipal organization? They've got, as I said before, up to 100 different things coming at them. What benefit can engagement with your organization provide? And never sell just on features. This is my marketing training coming back. I studied business at university. But if you're going to sell on benefits, not just features. If you're selling a car, if you're selling a convertible, the fact that the top comes down is a feature, but what's the benefit? Well, the benefit is your neighbors will think you're cool when they see you driving in that car, or it satisfies your lifelong desire to have a convertible or something. What's the benefit of having a convertible? Because quite frankly, they're noisy and drafty, or at least many of the ones that I've ridden in have been. So the features are one thing, but the benefits there, if you're going to engage somebody, figure out what the mutual benefits are. What's also important is, well, who are the key influencers? And it's not always obvious with any organization, and the municipal council is no different. The head of council may be the key influencer. The head of council is an important figure, but in the long run, he or she only has one vote. He or she doesn't put together the agenda for council meetings. He or she doesn't put together the budget. He or she is the leader of the council, but clearly doesn't control the council. You may find that there's an individual member who has a greater interest than the head of council, and that's the person who you should spend some effort cultivating. Excuse me. You need to get to know who the individual members are and what their interests are. It may be that there's a particular committee chair. The chief administrative officer has a significant amount of influence in the organization, obviously, and may have a passion, or it may be a department head. So I would think that, and again, I can think of my involvement with the Ashfield, Colborne, Wawanosh Township here. We've had times when heads of council have been keenly interested, long-serving heads of council, but elections change heads of council. It's important to know what the interests are of individual members, because if you've got an engagement, you've got to nurture that engagement as well. So there's going to be turnover in your organization. There's going to be turnover in their organization. So you've got to keep nurturing that relationship. CAO can be a tough one to deal with, because he or she is juggling not just one or two balls, but it's like the guy who was spinning the plates on the Ed Sullivan show 40 years ago. He's got to keep them all moving at one time. And obviously a department head such as a director of planning or director of environmental services might be a key influencer, but it's going to be different with every council or with every local board as well. So what's the key to lasting engagement? Well, it's to make sure that you continue to have mutually shared goals or outcomes. That is, the benefits have to continue to be delivered for each party. So you've got to make sure you know your audience on a longer term basis and what their present needs are, because their needs change. The key influencers, same thing, their needs change. The marketers refer to key influencers as opinion leaders. So you need to keep that in mind. There are people who have more influence than others for one reason or another in an organization. They may also be people that you identify as networkers. People who belong to a number of different organizations are networkers. They are often more influential than the people who sit at the center of an organization. Of an organization. Now, what does this do to, what's it done with our organization? And how does it follow through? Well, as a result of having the elected officials from the local township, the chair of the Board of Health, the longstanding member and chair of the Conservation Authority, who was also a local mayor, and with the support of people like Ted Briggs and the support of Phil Beard, the Conservation Authority, we managed to arrange a meeting with the then Minister of the Environment. We also tapped into the fact that his policy advisor on Great Lakes and water quality issues is someone that we were familiar with from previous contacts and understood what that person's position was. One of the things that you need to know before you meet a provincial cabinet minister, in my experience, is that any agreement that's going to be reached at the meeting is probably reached before the meeting ever takes place, or likely should be sketched out before the meeting ever takes place. Because if you're just making the pitch, it'll be considered and thanks very much for coming in. So you need to do a lot of homework. You need to figure out who those key influencers are, because they're going to provide their influence to the cabinet minister before the meeting takes place. Throughout all of this, there was ongoing work with the Ministry of the Environment at the time. Todd Howell, who was a senior scientist with the Ministry of the Environment, was continuing his nearshore water quality work. And through, I get the right terms, microbial DNA analysis of the E. coli in the nearshore waters, he was able to determine that the majority of that was livestock, over 60%. The remaining percentage he found to be probably 10% wildlife, and another 1% was identified as human waste, and the balance was undetermined but assumed to be in those other same proportions. That was important, that the work that we had done was actually supported the work and led to the initiation in part of the work that he did. So it's now well understood by all of the parties involved that what was influencing our part of Lake Huron clearly was runoff from the land, and the application of let's call them nutrients was a very significant cause. Interestingly, once we had cleared the fact that it wasn't septics, the skeptics said, well, it's obviously wildlife, it's deer and coyotes, but it turned out it wasn't. It was livestock applications. That has in itself been very helpful to the staff of Ministry of the Environment and Climate Change, the staff of OMAFRA, staff of the conservation authorities, and to freeing up resources from other parties for addressing the issue. But it took a long time. Where we are today, and the work that's been started, and the really good work that's being done by the Healthy Lake Huron Initiative and the organizations that participate, it's been going on for close to 40 years now, and it's something that continues to need to be nurtured by the different parties. The biggest fear I have is that we'll lose the initiative from our Lakeshore members. And that's our problem as opposed to the municipal problem. So anyway, I think I've probably taken too long, Greg, and I don't even think I turned my screen on to do that, did I? So
that's great.
Happy to answer any questions or look forward to the breakout room.
Yeah, for sure. Thanks so much, Nigel. It was great sort of to get that very municipal focused lens in terms of how to engage and how to influence in there. And it was nice to have you remind me of just that aspect of kind of like knowing your audience and speaking their language. And it's something that I'm constantly reminding myself before going into meetings, is just to be aware of that in advance. So appreciate that. Nigel is joining us in the breakout rooms. If you have any follow-up questions for him, or we do have time for one question at this time, if there's anything there.
I do have a question.
Awesome. Thanks, Elaine.
Thank you, Nigel, for your presentation. This is really important information I think more people need to talk about. There's so much confusion, especially outside government, regarding who to focus on to affect change, in part because the jurisdiction and mandates for fresh water are so distributed across government, like agencies, levels, departments. Do you have any tips on how members of the public can navigate this more easily?
Individual members of the public have a difficult time. Organizations, if you have whether it's formal or informal organization, It's if you're dealing with a local council or even a city council, it's built a lot on relationships. So you need to figure out what's mutually beneficial to those other parties. To go and make a presentation at a municipal council and say, well, I've engaged them. Well, no, you haven't. All you've done is made a presentation. Okay. You need, it's not even communication. It's just one-way delivery of a message. You need to make sure that there's some kind of two-way communication. And in fact, if you're making a presentation to a municipal council or engaging a municipal council, you should be talking to some of the members or the people who are going to be present at the meeting before the meeting ever takes place, to ensure that you know what their questions are going to be so that you can prepare their answers, or so that if you have a quote friend, you know what that engagement is going to be. You in effect, you script the dialogue, the informal dialogue before it ever takes place. That may sound a little crass, but that's all about relationship building.
That's great.
Thank you.
So at this time, thank you again, Nigel, for taking the time and for joining us in the breakout room afterwards. We'll just, because we've got sort of a half-hour time slot available for the breakout rooms, and I need to give you some instructions before Katrina sends us on our way. Overall, I just wanted to take this time right now to thank everybody who came on to speak, but also all of you for attending today and listening and asking questions, and providing resources in the chat for us to then share with everybody. It's great. It does meet the intention of the Lake Huron Georgian Bay Watershed Initiative for community action, rather. And we truly appreciate all the work that everybody is doing and the ability to connect today. There will not be a formal closing. So what